Ms. Sylvia Lim.
Madam Deputy Speaker, for a long time, security officers have had to operate in a difficult working environment. While they are tasked to protect property and persons, they are not adequately protected by the law in executing their duties. They are at risk when confronting hostile members of the public and can be unfairly targeted for simply carrying out the instructions of premise owners, instructions which could be unpopular or badly thought through. The diverse profile of security officers in the industry, ranging from the young to the elderly, is an added concern. In 2019, the government pushed ahead to raise standards of conduct among security officers by introducing a change to the private security industry conduct regulations. The change made it a criminal offence for security officers to be potentially negligent while on duty, such as to fall asleep or to not respond promptly to certain calls for assistance. If convicted of such an offence, an officer could be fined up to $2,000 or jailed for up to 3 months or both. While I understood the rationale behind the change, I raised concerns in Parliament at that time. I was concerned about whether a strict implementation of the legislation would be fair, given the diverse profiles of security officers and varying resources available to them at their deployment sites. Madam, in that regard, I welcome the changes brought by this bill, which will give security officers greater confidence on the ground. The key change brought about by this bill is in Clause 3, which introduces various new offences to criminalise acts of obstruction and abuse of security officers while on duty. By enacting these specific offences, a public signal is being sent that conduct such as obstructing, abusing, or harassing security officers are serious offences that will be punished accordingly. As for the calibration of punishments, I note that the punishments in the proposed sections 17A and B are set somewhere between the punishments for similar conduct against public officers and that against ordinary citizens. Thus, for instance, the offence of voluntarily causing hurt to a security officer in the course of his duty will attract imprisonment of up to 5 years, between the maximum jail terms in the Penal Code for similar conduct against a public servant, which attracts 7 years, and that against ordinary citizens, which attracts 3 years. I believe that this is an appropriate approach for the offences of using criminal force and voluntarily causing hurt to security officers. However, Madam, in order to ensure that this law will indeed improve outcomes for the industry and for the public, it must be accompanied by appropriate levels of training and the ability to attract able persons into the sector. For the last few decades, there has been much outsourcing of work previously done by the police to the auxiliary police and to private security. Today, security officers are expected to do much more than just guard the entrances of factories or shopping malls in a balmy environment. Today, security officers may be deployed to work in higher intensity conditions, such as event security, crowd control, and even to assist in the search of persons. Earlier, the Minister of State also mentioned that they are deployed in enforcing COVID-related safe management measures with high interactions with the public. Madam, whether security officers are adequately trained and suitably equipped for their tasks is an important background factor which will affect the way members of the public interact with them. If they do not have adequate training or their working environment is not conducive, altercations between them and the public are quite likely to take place. To this end, I would stress that it is not just the hard skills that are required, for example, knowing what the laws are or the extent of a security officer's powers. It is equally necessary that security officers have training in the soft skills to be able to handle difficult people, use tactful language, and so on. To take an example, security officers in shopping malls may actually spend more time on their shifts dealing with public queries about where certain facilities like toilets are located, rather than with the prevention of crime. People skills are thus critical. At the same time, being able to attract able persons to join the industry has not been easy. From my observations, there is a heavy reliance on Malaysians to fill security positions. In my former capacity as a polytechnic lecturer, I had conducted some research into perceptions of Singaporean security officers on their work prospects. At that time, about 15 years ago, some security officers told me that they would not encourage their children to enter the industry, mainly due to the long hours involved. To this end, I note that the situation has improved somewhat. In answer to my parliamentary question in July this year, the Ministry of Manpower reiterated that the overtime hours for security officers have come down, even if the proportion of full-time security officers who still did overtime each month for last year was still nearly 8 out of 10 officers, or 80%. To attract able people to join the industry, the current efforts to improve the image and working conditions should continue. Earlier, the Minister of State mentioned the Security Industry Transformation Map announced in 2018. This ITM has identified key strategies which I agree have the potential to enhance the industry's image and capabilities. For instance, the concerted push towards adopting technology in operations has the potential to both improve job satisfaction and productivity, as well as to reduce manpower needs and long working hours for security officers. Madam, as these initiatives are still being rolled out, teething problems are expected. For instance, I have observed instances of long and angry queues at condominium entrances when new security systems are installed, with the security officers being the subject of verbal abuse. On this front, I would urge managers of premises to work with security providers to ensure smooth rollouts of new systems and thereby to minimize stress on security officers. Members of the public, too, can play their part by exercising patience and remembering that the officers are simply trying to do their jobs. Thank you.